Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. We are so glad that you are here for this third Beyond Roe v. Wade seminar series, and I'm really excited about our topic for today. How many of you have been able to attend the first two workshops that were done? Okay, so you kind of got in the flow. The very first one, I was able to attend that one in person. It was excellent on just kind of the history and the background. How did we get from where we were even 200 years ago to where we are today, and then the possibilities of what could happen this summer as the Supreme Court weighs this decision. It's a very important decision. And then the second one, which I had the opportunity to join via live stream, really took a very different look at this issue of abortion and looked at Christian citizenship in really a theological perspective. And today we're going to go in really a different direction, and we're going to look at the personal side of this issue. We're going to look at the women who are facing an unplanned, perhaps an unwanted, a crisis pregnancy, and we're going to talk about that issue, which is a very different perspective, and I'm really excited about the perspectives you're going to hear today. My name is Janice Suplee, and I'm going to be your moderator. But really, I want you to hear from the panelists today. We're going to make this a discussion. I have questions prepared for them, but they will have the opportunity to interact with each other. And then after about 35 or 40 minutes, as we've done in the other sessions, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. And we'll just ask you to come up to the mic up here on my left, your right, so that everybody can hear you. And then we will just let this conversation flow based on the things that are of most interest to you. So let me open us up in prayer, and then I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists today, and then give them an opportunity to talk about how they are personally or professionally connected to this issue. Father, I pray that you would guide our conversation today. I pray that anything we say would be honoring and glorifying to you, and that you would help us to say things that are true and honest, and just guide our conversation. We look forward to this hour together. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, on my right here is Professor Amanda Miner. She is an assistant professor of nursing here in our School of Nursing, and she's also a certified family nurse practitioner. And she has centered most of her career around women's health, and so she brings that medical perspective to this issue. And then in the middle is Tara Winter. Tara is known to many of you. She is the Disability Services Manager here at Cedarville, but she's also a pastor's wife. And her husband, Ken, is the lead teaching pastor up at Heritage Fellowship. So her perspective is on dealing with women here at Cedarville, as well as women in her church, and then also a personal perspective that I think will be helpful to you. And then on the farthest end here is Kat Shanks, and she has spoken in chapel. Some of you may remember her from last year. She serves as Executive Director of New Path Pregnancy Resource Centers. She has worked with pregnancy care centers for the past 30 plus years, so really invested her career in women facing these issues. And she has literally served thousands of clients who are facing an unplanned or difficult pregnancy situation. So I'm so thankful that the three of you agreed to be part of this conversation. I want to start with this. I've introduced kind of who you are, the very basics, but I want these students to hear from you in terms of what is your connection to this issue, whether it's personally or professionally, and that'll give us a starting point. So, Professor, would you like to start today?
Yes, thank you for that introduction. So like she said, my background is as a nurse practitioner. So I've been blessed for almost the past nearly decade to work in a clinic in Springfield where we serve women who sometimes are from a lower socioeconomic standpoint, and so they come to us with a variety of unique needs. And so that's been really a great opportunity just to minister to them through a variety of unique situations. I've also had the opportunity to serve as a volunteer at the Pregnancy Resource Clinic in Springfield, so I've been able to witness to women in that opportunity as well. And then personally, I'm also an adoptive mom, and so I have the unique personal perspective as that as well.
Hello, everyone. So I come from this perspective of ministry related, just from the church perspective. have a lot of opportunity to work with families, to work with students, to work with women, and what that looks like from the church perspective. I also volunteer at the Pregnancy Resource Clinic in Clark County as a care coordinator for women. When I was a college student, I faced my own crisis pregnancy and was dismissed out of college because of that crisis pregnancy. So I've been there, and the Lord has done an incredible redemptive work through that experience. But it has all led to be able to minister in this unique way to this topic.
Thank you. What a joy to be here today. So when I think about why I'm involved in unplanned pregnancy, I was an unplanned pregnancy for my mom. In the mid-'60s, abortion wasn't legal, but it was available if you knew who to go to and you knew who to ask. And my parents were married, but it was a really bad marriage. My dad was an alcoholic and violent and abusive, and my mom already had 4 little ones, and she was 26 years old. And one of the neighbor ladies offered to help her go to Mexico to get an abortion. And the Lord, in his sweet providence, as he does, that very same week that she's talking with her neighbor friends, her girlfriends, about whether she would take them up on this offer to go to Mexico, the pastor of the little neighborhood church was going door to door in our neighborhood, and he came to our house, and Mama ended up telling him the whole story. And he looked at her and he said, "You're not going to do that." And he read Jeremiah 1:4-5, which say, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you and appointed you as a prophet to the nations." And he said, just like God has a plan and a purpose had a plan and a purpose for Jeremiah's life, God has a plan and a purpose for this baby's life, and we'll walk with you. And they did. They kept their word. And then fast forward, I'm in college, getting an undergrad in biblical counseling, and they sent me to the Crisis Pregnancy Center to do my senior internship. I was 20 years old, and I've never left. And that was a long time ago. Look at the gray. So.
And I should mention, too, when Dr. Smith asked me to lead this panel, for me, this is very personal as well, because we have an adoptive son, but it is an open adoption. And so we got to know, I'll start to cry, we got to know the birth mom and walk that road with her, and to see the very incredibly difficult decision that she made. That's one reason why this is such a meaningful conversation to me as well. So I'm going to start with kind of maybe a different angle, and I'm going to start the question with you, Kat. But I want to talk about why abortion has become such a watershed issue with women, especially as it relates to women's rights, feminism. I think it was Dr. Smith that read this quote to us in the first session from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she kind of states it this way. She says, women, it is now acknowledged, have the talent, capacity, and right to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation. Their ability to realize their full potential, the court recognized, is intimately connected to their ability to control their reproductive lives. Thus, legal challenges to undue restrictions on abortion procedures do not seek to vindicate some generalized notion of privacy. Rather, they center on a woman's autonomy to determine her life's course and thus to enjoy equal citizenship stature. That's a very serious understanding of reproductive rights. So talk about your perspective, and feel free, Tara and Amanda, I want you to feel free to jump in. But how do we respond biblically to that understanding?
Talk about a loaded statement, right? When you think about all of the presuppositions packed into that thing, you just it makes your mind just kind of swirl around. But I boiled it down. The questions were, I'll tell you, we got some of the questions ahead of time, and I'm thankful. But as I was thinking and praying about how to answer that, I kept thinking about Psalm 2, especially verse 3, where it says, "Let us cast off his cords from us and break away those chains." And what I'm really hearing in that statement is, I want to have sovereignty. I don't want God to have sovereignty. I want to have sovereignty. So this battle for autonomy, can I tell you, I'm probably, I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest one on this panel. Nobody was talking about autonomy for 17-year-olds in my day, okay? But y'all have grown up on that, right? and it's just part of the air you breathe and the water you swim in. So this push for autonomy. The other presupposition that really stands out to me there is this push for equality. So what they really want to do, I'm going to use the word mitigate. They want to mitigate the consequences. So what they basically want is for women to not have to deal with the same consequences or with consequences that men don't have to deal with. So can men get pregnant? A little louder for the folks in the back. So, so men can't get pregnant. And so what they're trying to say is because men can't get pregnant, we're stymied in our ability to pursue our goals, dreams, desires, whatever it might be. Instead of saying, you know what, my body was made in an incredible way where I can actually carry another human being. Men can't do that, right? And so they're trying to mitigate the consequence of their choices without changing their choices. Make sense? They want to take those reins away from God's sovereignty. Remember, God always says that the opening of the womb is a blessing and the closing of the womb is not. And so they're pushing back on what God, it's a reversal. It's all about a reversal, isn't it? It's that reversal of God calls children a blessing, that calls children a hindrance or even a curse. It's always the same lie, isn't it? It's always the same lie. The third thing that stands out to me there is that they really want to push for this economic equality of opportunity, whether it's athletic or political or career stuff, whatever it might be. But it's their desires. Listen to the language again. If you want to hear the question again, you can even come and talk to me about it later. But listen to the desires that motivate. And it reminds me of Genesis 4 when the Lord tells Cain that sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for you. That sin of covetousness, and I would also reference 1 Timothy chapter 6, check verses like 9 through 10, 9 through 11 for that one. But about how the desires drive. James 4 will say that the reason there are quarrels and fights among you is because of your desires that then lead to death. There's a covetousness that leads to death, right? And so all of that is packed into that desire for autonomy. We want to cast off your chains, this desire for equality, the rejection of God's order, and then that covetousness that just seems to be kind of the heartbeat behind the whole thing. And of course, covetousness, Ephesians, Paul would tell us is the sin of idolatry, right? I will be God. I will be God. It's Babel. It's Babel. Genesis 11.
Either of you want to comment on that?
From personal experience, when you're 19 in a college and you know you're going to get kicked out, that was my story. All of the expectations and dreams that you thought you had for your entire life, or that your parents have, that your family have. And so for me, a lot of what you were just saying, yeah, like that's how I felt. Like I wanted to have that control. I didn't want to give up all of those things that I had in store for me. Those dreams to finish college and get married and have this family and all of these dreams. I thought in that moment I was saying no to all of those things. That because of this unplanned pregnancy, because of this crisis I found myself in, that I was going to have to give up all that. And so that's honestly where I was emotionally in that time, in that moment. My life changed a little bit. My boyfriend at the time then said, no, we're going to do this together. And so it wasn't then just all on my shoulders. It wasn't just me as the woman in that situation having to make all those decisions by myself. He joined me in that, and we committed our lives together to do it together. But those first initial thoughts, you carry it on your shoulders, and you want to be God, and you want to have control over this very out of control situation. And sometimes you feel like the only option is that out.
Go ahead.
My thoughts are along the lines of yours, Tara, and they're brief. But I would just add that I think when we think we're in control, that's a bit of an illusion anyway, because we're really not. The Bible tells us that, God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and his ways are better than our ways. And he calls the children a blessing. And so I think as a society, we maybe just need to pause in the way that we're framing just this whole conversation. And so I'm thankful that you all are here today to embrace this topic.
That's good. You've kind of touched on this a little bit, Tara, but I'm going to talk a little bit about stereotypes and misconceptions. So we may have a picture of what this woman looks like in your mind, someone who's facing an unplanned, unwanted pregnancy. Talk about, in your experience, and I know all of you have different experiences, what are some of the misconceptions we have about who this person is?
Sometimes we think it's that girl, that person. It's not your roommate. It's not the person you have dinner with. Because we all like to hide our sin. I know for me, my experience is when I was walking through this, I felt so much shame and so much pressure being at a Christian college, knowing that if anyone found out, we would be kicked out. That's the weight I felt. So my boyfriend and I, we were engaged in this very sinful situation together, and yet we couldn't tell anybody. So you may think it's that girl over there, or it's the girl sitting right next to you. It's the guy sitting right next to you. This is something we're all dealing with. It's something that is rampant on college campuses. It is out there, especially in the society that we have, is just this sexualization is so commonplace. Not to say that you're all doing things in the secret place, but specifically on college campuses like Cedarville, you want to keep those sins quiet. You want to bury them deep. And the Lord says, when it's in the darkness and it eats you alive, but when we bring that sin to light of what he can do in that, I think society has led us to believe that an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy means your life needs to stop. That, of course, you have to stop going to high school or stop going to college, or all of those things change. You might think that it is the person that is at a disadvantage in society because of this thing, this unplanned, this unwelcome pregnancy. Here's the thing, it can be anyone. It's all of us. It's not just that girl. It could be anyone. And so I think removing that judgment that we have, removing those feelings of it's far away, it's not. It could be in the dorm room next to you. It could be your roommate. It could be the person you are in class with. We all have these sin issues. Is how open are we with them, and change that misconception of the sin that we carry.
So Kat and Amanda, as you deal with clients and patients, give us a sense, like typically the women that are facing this type of situation, are they younger? Like my birth mom was 16. Are they older? Are they working? Like what are the situations you're seeing?
It can be anything. I described my own mom. She was married with 4 children, right? She's a stay-at-home mom, but she had a crisis pregnancy because of things you didn't know were happening behind those doors, right? It can be the woman that's 43 and thought she was done having children. It can be the woman who was sexually assaulted, and now she's facing an unplanned pregnancy. I've dealt with that. We have those people. It can be the 16-year-old. It can be the 27-year-old. We know statistically that the ones that are at highest risk for abortion are in their 20s. That's when many of them, they're outside of their parents' home, and that's when they become more sexually active. They make much more dangerous choices, whether it's Tinder or whatever else it might be. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. And so it's a variety of things, but the thing that is most concerning to me today about women in unplanned pregnancy that has changed over the last 35 years of service is that more and more women are becoming pregnant, not by people they know, but by people that they have very little relationship with, which actually renders them far more vulnerable than they were previously. It used to be that they were at least in relationship. Now, many of them, that is just simply not true. They don't even know the guy's last name. And it may not have been his real name when they swiped on Tinder. So.
It's very similar to what we see in clinical practice. The issue of paternity is not one that's uncommon. And I do see that has increased over the number of years. And I would say our population is very similar. We see anyone from a very young age to someone who thinks she's in menopause and is not, and has found themselves pregnant. A crisis pregnancy doesn't mean necessarily in our office that it's unwanted, but sometimes it is most certainly a surprise. And sometimes that woman is just grappling with making decisions and what do I do now and how do I go about, facing this reality.
So Amanda, good segue here. You're a medical professional, obviously, and I'm guessing there's some nursing majors out here, others who are looking to go into healthcare. When you're in a room with a patient who says, "I want an abortion," how do you deal with that? Where do you go?
So if I know that conversation is coming ahead of time, I bask that visit in prayer. Certainly before I go in, I'm praying quietly during that visit, and then I'm most certainly praying for that patient continually after that visit. One of my favorite verses is 2 Timothy 1:7. It says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And in nursing, we're taught that there are certain ethical principles that we have to uphold. We have a duty to tell the truth. We have a duty to do no harm. And so we have to uphold those things. And in our society, whether or not we are happy with the outcome or happy with the choice that the patient makes, they do have that right, at least as it currently stands, and we'll see where that goes with Roe versus Wade. But that's where I start. I will certainly start with prayer, and then I usually try to have a conversation with that patient and see, where is this stemming from? What kind of resources do you need? Is this really I want an abortion, or is this really I'm fearful? Is this I feel a lack of support? And then I try to find out where that conversation can lead from there. At the end of the day, my most important thing is that I want that patient to know and feel the love of Jesus. Because if they go on to parent their baby, if they go on to choose an adoption plan, or if they choose to have an abortion, I want that patient to know that they can come back to my office and that they can see me and that I will love them with the love of Jesus no matter what decision that they have made.
And Kat, in your work with pregnancy resource centers, how do you interact with healthcare professionals in your community? What's the symbiotic relationship there?
We are so grateful. In Marysville, we have a great group of OB docs that take really great care of our clients. And so we're able to get our clients in pretty quickly. We know that often just getting them established with good medical care is one of the biggest ways to get them past that initial, what am I going to do? Many of them have not had a lot of experience with making their own doctor's appointments and things like that, and it's a really intimidating thing. And so helping them get through Medicaid, fill out that paperwork, then get to the doctor, then what questions do I ask, and how do I handle myself? It's a whole new conversation for many of them. And so just helping them with that. So the doctors there, they will do a sonogram for our clients if they're what we would call abortion vulnerable, abortion minded, or abortion determined. But if we have a client who's considering abortion, they will do a sonogram for her, and they will give her that window to the womb. They will show that to her. This is so precious. One of the docs in the Marysville office a couple of weeks ago texted me and said, "Kat, I've got a gal and she's post-abortive, and I want to help her, and I think the best way I can help her is by bringing her to you. So could we make an appointment and I will come with her?" So the OBGYN came to my office with her client who had gotten an abortion against her counsel, right, to show the love of Christ, right, and sat there with her, an hour and a half they sat with me that day. That's remarkable, especially in this day, to show that kind of love and that kind of compassion. So we have a really great relationship with our local OBGYNs.
That's great. So when any of the three of you are counseling, working with a woman who is considering an abortion, and they change their mind, they choose life, they choose an adoption plan, or they choose to parent the baby, what would you say are the factors that help that woman make that decision? Because as I think about us as believers, one of the things we want to think about is, how can we engage? How can we make a difference? We'll talk more about that. But as you've worked with women, what are the factors that help her change her mind?
Show up. Love them. Relationship, right? Be that person that shows up. Be the person that says, "I'll walk with you." You don't have to have all the answers. Just get them to somebody that can help you all get the next step down the road, right? But be there and be faithful and pray for them. Trust that the Holy Spirit is at work. If you are trusting Christ and if you're seeking Him and you're trying to walk alongside somebody, He's going to help you in your weakness. He's going to give you grace for that, and He's going to give them grace for that. He's so abounding in grace, right? Super abounding in grace. The factors that really make the difference are people that are willing to say, just like Tara said, "I've been there. I know, so tell your story," right? Tell your story of adoption, my story of being a crisis pregnancy for my mom. But tell the story, because most of us have one. And share that with them, because one of the things that the enemy tells them is that they're alone. That nobody else has ever had this experience. They're the only one. The enemy tells them that no one's going to understand. The enemy tells them that it's hopeless. So be the person that shows up with hope. We talk a lot about lending people hope at New Path. We talk about giving them the hope we have in Christ, and sharing that with them. Pray with them. Pray for them. Do you have any idea how many folks have never had anyone pray for them? They've never had someone talk to the King of Heaven with their name on their lips. Pray for them, and trust God to be at work, and keep showing up.
For me personally, I wanted to run away, to be honest. That's what I wanted to do. I come from a conservative Christian family. I was on a conservative Christian campus, and I felt very alone. I felt like I didn't know anybody. Like, I know you said everybody has a story, but I didn't know anybody. Like, in that moment, I didn't know what to do, where to go. And my plan was though my boyfriend at the time said, "Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to be together." It was to run away together. And we were up in Boston, so the farthest place I could think of was California. And surely California has one of those places you can have a baby quietly and give it up for adoption and then return to campus like nothing ever happened. That sounded like a great plan to me. He didn't think so, so we got married instead. But for me, once we told our family, and my husband comes from a pastor's family, so you can imagine how that went. It was one of the hardest things we've ever had to walk through, was face our family. But we did it, and our family far exceeded every one of the ways I thought they were going to react. I thought we were going to get kicked out of our family. I thought they would turn their backs on us. I thought we were going to be judged and scorned and ridiculed, and like our family would turn their back on us, but they didn't. They showed up in incredible ways. The other people that made such a difference for us was our church. Once the church found out, they rallied around us like something I never dreamed a conservative church would do. They threw me a baby shower. They brought us meals. They prayed with us. The women of that church rallied around me. That was the difference maker for me. That's what allowed me to walk through this. I don't know how we're going to do this. It was really hard. We were working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And then we had a crisis delivery. So not only was she a crisis pregnancy, she was a crisis delivery. And then we had a really sick baby and just being married. So it was tough. I'm not going to say it was easy. It wasn't. But the way you can be involved is show up. Be there. Support, pray. You don't have to have your own crisis pregnancy to be able to walk alongside of someone in it.
There's a phrase that I heard that I really like. Excuse me, it's called pro-life for the whole life. So when I see sometimes these women who are facing a crisis pregnancy, it's not just a crisis pregnancy, right? They're not looking at these next 9 months and then a delivery. They're looking at that plus then 18 years or beyond that, right? That is a lifetime commitment. And so the thought of that is very, very overwhelming, especially for a patient who is just making it perhaps day by day, paycheck to paycheck. So I echo these other ladies when I say, yes, showing up and support. I would say that is a huge reason why a lot of my patients feel that the only choice they have is an abortion, because they don't have the support that they need to feel like they can make any other decision.
You've really already begun to turn the conversation, but as I've thought about overturning Roe v. Wade, what if God allows that to happen in our nation? In some ways, I think the hard work has just begun. And sometimes it's easier to be against something than it is truly to be for something. What I'm hearing from you is the need for relationship and going deep with people and walking. That's not easy. That takes time. So for any of you, why is caring for women facing a crisis pregnancy such a difficult issue for the church, for us as individual Christians to deal with? Because if this is overturned, it will be more common than it is now, right?
Yeah, it will. Tara said something, and I want you to hear what she said. She had an expectation for how they were going to be treated by the church. And sadly, probably 10 years before they had their baby, that's exactly how she would have been treated. But we've turned a corner over the last 30 years or so, I would say. There used to be this thinking that, well, we don't want to reward those girls for that choice and that behavior. We don't want other people to get the idea, well, I can have a party too. And so they would withhold. And I'm going to tell you, go the other way, double down on grace. Right? Jesus said in Matthew 9, go and learn what this means, that I desire mercy and not sacrifice. When the King of Heaven says we need to learn something, by the way, that comes from Micah. When the King of Heaven says you need to learn something, you better get your pen and pencil out and start taking notes, right? He says, I want you to learn mercy. I want you to learn mercy. Have you drunk deeply at the well of mercy? You have if you know Christ. And just because it's not your story, you're a sinner saved by grace too. So double down on grace, y'all. Run with grace to the broken. Run with the mercy of the cross, that all of our sin can be forgiven. Go hard on. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Right? I mean, bet all you've got on the gospel and take it to them. They need it. They're dying for it. That's where we start. We're a gospel-first ministry. I know that broken people need Christ. It's not just that they're broken, they're dead in their trespasses and sin. But Ephesians 2, but God, being rich in mercy because of his great love with which he loved us, right?
Yeah.
Mercy, grace, gospel, go.
The girl I most identified was the woman caught in adultery. You kind of feel like you're walking around with a scarlet letter on your chest. That's what it feels like. Yeah, like you feel like all of the Pharisees are surrounding you, ready with their stones and their rocks. But Jesus showed up. And it's in that moment I am constantly reminded of his grace, of his mercy. We are all broken. We are all sinners. And I think we can easily fall into the trap and the lie of, well, it's that sin is worse than my sin. It's not. Read your Bible. It is not. And so when we start comparing sins, we are quick to throw those stones. Put your stone down. And so when we come to the foot of Jesus, of just, yes, I am broken in all of the different ways, in there we minister. In there we know the gospel every single day. We live it out. And we show that mercy. How do you show mercy? You show it by recognizing your own sin, and my sin isn't different than yours, because Jesus died for that too. And so a big part of how the church ministers is gospel-centered. The gospel has to be first. And if it's not, it's none of it else matters. If that's not our starting point. And if we don't rest on Romans 8:1, that there is no condemnation, none, not for the adulterous woman, not for me, and not for you. If there's no condemnation, then we are all broken, and we all need the same Jesus. We all need his grace. And so let's walk in it together. Let's be the church and bear each other's burdens. Let's walk alongside of that with one another. I feel like we're at church a little bit right now. Like, let's go. Let's do it. Be vulnerable. Like I said, I was so filled with shame and secrecy when I was there. I was so afraid of the consequences. We have to be able to be vulnerable enough to say, yeah, this is my brokenness. This is what I'm dealing with. This is the temptation. This is the sin in my life. Because are we truly being authentic if we can't be there with it?
So kind of taking that another step, all of our students are, Lord willing, going to be, as Dr. White says, producers in a local church after they graduate. So let's say Roe v. Wade is overturned this summer. How do churches begin to prepare for what could be a very expanded ministry, a very different ministry? What would you say churches could be doing right now?
Well, I would say partnering with local pregnancy resource clinics is probably a great place to start. They are
Ding,
they are your feet on the ground. And so, I mean, Kat can probably attest to that better than I can, but I think that's a fantastic place to start. My other thought is, we often see vulnerable families, and I think as a society we've sort of seen the degradation of the family unit. And so I've often wondered, as a health professional and just watching these situations transpire and unfold over the course of time, how the church might just be willing to interact and identify a struggling family or a struggling individual before we get to that crisis moment. So that would be my other challenge to you, is to look around and identify someone in your neighborhood, someone in your local church, maybe someone who's on the cusp or on the fringe, and what can you do to minister to that person before they reach a crisis moment, whatever that might be.
I love that. And one of the things about isolation, is that we've become so isolated as a culture, we don't talk to folks anymore. Everybody's kind of head down, straight ahead, and then with all the masks and all that, nobody grown, I'm just making a comment, right? But we've become so isolated, and over the last 2 years with the pandemic, even more so. And we are so detached from one another. We don't have conversations, we don't have relationships, and people are lonely. And so the church needs to be the church, right? There was a gal that posted on Marysville Moms in the Know on Facebook this past weekend. She posted anonymously that she thought she was pregnant, and so all these women just started pouring out, I can help with this, I can help with this. Some of them were some trolls, but there's trolls. But what I loved is that there were women asking, have you been to church? You can go to church with me. Have you called New Path? You can call New Path. I could meet you for coffee somewhere. People started offering relationship, and I'm cheering them on. And so we need to open our eyes and see people, but also be that person that actually steps up, that just doesn't go, oh, maybe somebody should do something about that. It might just be you, right? It might just be you that needs to extend that hand or make that comment. We've become very fearful of talking to one another, and this is about anything, right? We've become a very fearful people of talking to people you don't know, and it's not, we weren't made for that. We were made by God, image bearers of God, to be in relationship, so offer it. So open your eyes, look, but also be the church that celebrates. Be the church that when they do come, that you celebrate, that it's the Luke 15, right? It's the prodigal coming home. Be the church that throws the party. Be the church that brings the meals. Be the church. Be the church. And then the last thing I would say is be wherever you are, right? Some of you are going to be doctors and lawyers and teachers and homemakers and missionaries and pastors. You're going to go all kinds of places, and you're going to go do all kinds of things. And you're not necessarily going to be constantly thinking, oh, that person might be in a crisis pregnancy, right? But ask the Lord to give you a heart and eyes to actually see people, and then to love them as your neighbor, right? To love them in Christ's name, and to be very intentional about that as you're going. I have no expectation that the whole room's going to show up to volunteer at a pregnancy care center for the next 35 years of your life, but get yourself educated about how you can help. Have some answers, whether it's about homelessness or food or whatever it might be, crisis pregnancy, but be a person who educates yourself so that in whatever sphere you're in later, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're not stumped for answers when a need arises.
As the church, I would say a big piece of this has to do with the person in crisis may not be walking through the church doors. So go, be in society, be in the world. We're called to shine our light where we go. And so engage in the world, in your workplace, outside of the church walls. Sometimes it's rare that you're going to have a person show up on the church's doorstep. That's not a common practice. Unless they have some sort of relationship, somebody invites them. People just don't wander into church. It's generally not how it goes. So go, you be the light, get out there, engage in the people around you, be different, let Christ drive that ministry with whomever you have contact with, wherever you have contact with, in whatever vocation the Lord has you in. He has you there for a reason and a purpose. And so allow that to be your ministry field, your mission field, wherever you are. Be educated on what to do. I think sometimes we feel a little lost. Here's the secret. You can't possibly be prepared for every situation that you're going to encounter in the world. And this is where we do need God's wisdom and his guidance in, Lord, I don't know what to do in this situation to help support this person, but he does. and we trust him to be sovereign and to guide us and lead us. And that's the Holy Spirit's job, to convict us, to guide us, to allow him to work in our lives and our hearts. So as a church, I would say get out there. Get out of the doors of the church. But also in preparing for Roe v. Wade, and what may happen is that we're not known as Christians who are ready to throw the stone. Be the person ready to give a hug, to be ready to pray, to be ready to support. Because I think a lot of society thinks we are ready to throw stones. Be different. Be Jesus.
So I'm going to ask the last question, but then we want to give you the opportunity for questions. So as soon as they're done, feel free just to come up and start asking questions. But one of the opportunities we have as believers is fostering and adoption, because not every woman will choose to parent their child, and we don't want them to choose an abortion. So talk about how Christians can minister, and this can be part of the whole process, fostering and adopting.
Okay, so this touches my heart because I have been a foster parent, and like I mentioned to you, I am an adoptive mom. And though you may not be personally called to foster or adopt, we all have been called to be a part of that in some capacity. And so there are a myriad of practical ways that you can be involved with that. You can come and see me personally afterwards if you want to talk in great depth about this, but I will just give you a few tips that I would say. If you know someone who is an adoptive and or foster parent, I would say get to know them. That can sometimes be a little bit challenging and sometimes lonely road to be on, and they could use a friend, they could use a companion. And I would be willing to learn where they are and to just be willing to walk alongside someone through that process. If you're wanting to dip your toes in the water, but you're not at a point where you're ready to have children in your home, or for most of you, a dorm is probably not an ideal situation for foster children, you can learn to do respite care, where you can go and do short-term care for children who are in foster care. There are lots of opportunities. Foster children often have a myriad of unique needs where they need transportation to different appointments. Churches, I think, have a really unique opportunity to minister to these children as well, too. Often these children come from really difficult and hard places, and so I think this is a really special place where churches could have a specific ministry, and maybe some of your churches do, where they could have special people who are equipped to handle some of those special needs, so that perhaps even those foster parents could go to a service and be able to sit and to worship and know that their children are being cared for in a way that is appropriate for their specific situation. So we could certainly talk in great detail about that, but I'll let my other participants speak if they'd like to.
Well, I think I'm going to open it up to questions, if that's okay, because I want to give you all a chance. So if you have a question, the mic is right here on my left, your right. Please feel free to come on up and ask your question of any of our panelists.
Okay, I was just wondering, is this on? Okay, I was just wondering, like, you've talked a lot about, like, what are ways that you can, like, show love to these women, but what are, like, some basic things that you should not do, and, like, things that you shouldn't say, and just, like, give us some clarity on that, just, yeah.
You want me to take that one?
Go for it.
Things not to do and things not to say. The first thing is don't shame them. Shame is probably one of the biggest factors. Don't be the doom and gloom person. Okay. Don't be Eeyore, right? So be the person that says, you know what? I cannot even imagine how hard this must be, but I'm going to walk with you, right? Don't say, oh, your parents are going to kill you. Oh, his parents are going to kill you. Oh, right? And don't be a who hunter, like who did this and who did that? Well, when did you, what did you do? This is not the time for those questions, right? And so don't shame, don't ask too many questions, right? One of the things Job's friends did well for the first week is they sat there. After that, it didn't go so well, right? If they just kept sitting there, it would have gone much better for everyone. It doesn't mean you can't talk, but it does mean you should be careful how you talk. And give them hope. So I'm going to go to the positive side. Instead of discouraging them, go to the positive side and give them hope. Because God is at work, and he's good, and he's kind, and he's abundant in loving kindness. And so don't shame. If you're not sure, be quiet. Give hope.
I'd like to just add to that, since we were talking a little bit about adoption and foster care. I think there is a lot of great conversation pieces that can be had there, but if we're talking about tips and tricks of things to avoid, I would say certain things to avoid would be anything that's a probing question. So a lot of times when children come into foster care, it's typically because there's some sort of abuse or neglect, and so the whole focus there is really to protect that child. And while we are naturally curious people, and it's our inclination to want to greet and to welcome a child, that's probably where that interaction in terms of questioning really needs to stop. So I wouldn't ask deep questions about like, what, why, how long. One, the foster and or adoptive parent really might not know all of that, at least initially. And two, they're not probably allowed to disclose it. And three, it's really just not helpful. So those would be things that I would just try to avoid if you're interacting with those kind of situations.
For a woman in a crisis pregnancy, don't assume. Just don't assume. Don't assume that she wants to get rid of the baby. Don't assume that her life has to come to an end. Don't assume that whatever, fill in the blank. Support. It's pretty much she's not going to know those answers right that second. She's probably just trying to hang on to her seat of, I don't know what the next step is. So be there, support. Shaming is definitely not the way to go. Again, put your stone down. It is lonely, it is hard, it is confusing, it is overwhelming, it is just hard, like life is spinning. If you've ever been in any crisis situation, you know how those first couple of things are. It's just overwhelming. And this is where you can just show up and don't assume anything about her.
Other questions?
Can I just, we didn't really talk about this as a topic for today, but I want to address it. There's a vast majority of women out there. Statistically, I can tell you there's more than 60 million women who have had an abortion since 1973, more than 60 million. That is an absolute staggering number of people. Then you've got the men, right? So, do the math. So let's say 50 million men, 60 million women, something like that. That's a whole mission field of shattered people. Not everyone regrets their abortion. There are some people that do not. But the statistics are, Karen and Emily wrote these down quickly for me so I would have them. 86% of women who are who had an abortion in Ohio in 2020 were single, okay? 86%. 84% said that they had inadequate counseling prior to having the abortion. 65% had multiple symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and 74% reported that they felt coerced into having the abortion. If the guy in their life had said, I'll help you, we don't have to do this, if he'd said what your boyfriend said, So many of those women would have chosen life. So many would have chosen life if the guy would have said, I am not going anywhere. I'll help. You're not alone. But listen to that statistic. 74% felt coerced. 74%. Is that okay? That's not okay. Either way, as you think about the people, this really does tie into how does the church respond. I know women in our churches who are post-abortive, and they don't feel like they have the right to celebrate Mother's Day, or they don't feel like they have the right to celebrate another woman's baby shower. They don't feel like they have the right to come to certain events or to do certain things, because if those people knew who I am and what I'd done, would they welcome me? And it's a whole nother part of this story, and I don't want to just unpack it all now. Wasn't what I was invited to do, but I'm going to just throw it out there. Be people who, not just looking at the woman who's had the unplanned or crisis pregnancy, but the woman who is post-abortive. Maybe she's had 2 abortions. Maybe she's had 4 abortions. I remember one woman, and I'll end with this story for this comment. I was speaking at a women's ministry event. There was a woman in the back towards the left-hand side, and she began to just wail. I don't mean crying quietly, I mean wailing. And she went out into the narthex. Some women went with her. You could even hear her out there. They tried to come back in. She couldn't come back in. She went back out. And so I finished speaking for this thing, and I'm looking for her. Can't find her. And I feel a hand on my shoulder as I'm getting my purse and my Bible. And I turn around, and it's her. And so I dropped everything, and I just wrapped my arms around her, and I started praying for her. And she said, can I ask you a question? I'm like, you're the reason I'm here today, so sit down, let's talk. And she said, someone told me that Jesus would forgive the first abortion, but I have to ask, what about the other 9? That's the reality some people face. It's not 2, it's not 4. They've had so many abortions that it has just defined their whole life. And so responding to those people, whether they've had 1 or they've had 10 or they've had 14, how are we going to respond to those folks? And do we really believe the gospel? Do we really actually believe that Jesus can wash us as white as snow? And so that's another piece of ministering within the church to this broken-hearted group of people who think if they told you, you've had this perfect life, you went to this Christian college and you come from this Christian family and you married your college sweetheart and then you had your babies, and how could you possibly understand? Be that person that says, there but for the grace of God. There but for the grace of God.
I think that's a perfect way to end, just to be reminded that God is our Redeemer. He takes the broken and He heals us. And what a precious reminder that is. So Amanda, Tara, Kat, thank you so much for your time. And students, thank you for taking this hour with us. I hope you have a very good evening.